So I wanted to kind of think about and look into the history of clown, and this is what Wikipedia tells me, that there were ancient clowns of Egypt that traditionally served as a socio-religious and psychological role. And it says the priest and clown were kind of like the same person, which I thought was interesting. And then in the Sioux Native American tribes, they had something called the Heyoka. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. A type of sacred clown. I thought this was really fascinating. That did everything backwards or upside down or contrary to nature. So like, for example, if food was scarce, then they would walk around as if they were really full. And let's see. So, and it was kind of like their role in society was to help the society think about things that are hard to talk about or hard to acknowledge in their society. And then I also read that in ancient Greek and Roman cultures, they had this kind of rustic fool character, whose Greek name literally translates into play like a child. So there's like this kind of, we talking about like with Jess and her children, sort of this childlike. And then there was this quote, let's see, by the person who wrote the Wikipedia. So who knows if they're credible.
Can you do that? Can you quote yourself in a Wikipedia?
I don't know. I was confused, but I really liked the quote, so I'm gonna read it. I don't care. It says, the comedy that clowns perform is usually in the role of a fool whose everyday actions and tasks become extraordinary, and for whom the ridiculous for a short while becomes ordinary. This style of comedy has a long history in many countries and cultures across the world. Some writers have argued that due to the widespread use of such comedy and its long history, it is a need that is part of the human condition.
Oh, and for those of you who can't see, there was a hand flourish.
What?
I was just saying, for those of you just listening, Katie had
there
really
was a hand flourish.
Flourish.
Is that what that's called? A hand flourish.
Yes.
So thoughts?
You know, I've heard about most of those, and you know, I'm always of two minds here, because I do feel like that last quote of this idea of like a synergy or a similar, like, I don't know, like, were they all, was that clowning? Was like clowning is a difficult term, you know, in general. I mean, I will say that to this day, ritual in general, definitely the Venn diagram of like religious ritual, spiritual ritual, and clown. I mean, obviously you think about just being Catholic, and it's like, now you kneel, now you stand. Like, it's very much an interactive process of like, this thing happens, and then we have this response. Like, we know the rules of what, like the math, like, and we find joy as a group, all being part of it. And some of my favorite clown shows have had a lot of ritualistic elements of like getting the audience to do a series of movements with the performer, or getting the audience to sort of yell something out at the same time, or make sounds at the same time. My friend Dr. Brown, I can't pronounce the name of the show. It's like 16 letters that don't make sense, just to be a dick. He did that, I think. And he has a great bit on a bicycle where he has all these sounds and these things that the audience then knows to say. And then he starts to mess with them. You know, he starts to change it up, and they're trying to keep up. And, you know, that there's definitely religious elements there. And yeah, like I think I related most with the Wikipedia author, who's the great clown author, Wikipedia author, in the sense that I do feel that there's a part of us that sort of contemporary society has decided has to die at the end of childhood, so that we can be responsible and, you know, be serious, and for whatever reason, the idea that both of things can exist, or maybe that they are simply translated into, now you're a Chicago Bears fan, or now you're in a bowling league, like whatever, like it was put into sort of categories that were more maintainable and controllable. And that to me is like the excitement of teaching. Even that's why, no matter, like, I always, even when I'm working, think like, oh, I can't wait to get back to teach, because there's going to be somebody who's never experienced this before. And I'm going to see that moment where they're like, I haven't felt this since I was a little kid. I haven't felt this sense of like wonder and stupidity and foolishness that I do feel like it's like there's just a part of our brain that isn't being treated like this area hardwired to play that just not isn't being cared for, you know, and being activated. And once it's activated, it's like, oh yeah, that could be a part of my life continuously. It doesn't have to be just under these circumstances. I can find ways to be foolish and fun and joyful and love the experience of trying things and doing poorly and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think what this kind of brings up for me is, you know, clearly clowning has been around for a really long time. But really just in the last like 30 to 50 years, you've seen like the decline of, you know, coming from, you know, someone who hasn't experienced much clowning. People are afraid of clowns. People think clowns are stupid. People, you know, people are like, oh, like that's played out. I think in the 70s, there was just like this love of clowns that kind of happened. People had clown doll, like there was, then It, you know, Stephen King's It came out.
Yeah, didn't do us any favors.
Yeah, there's this whole thing around clowns that kind of changed the way that our society views it. But like in the grand scheme of time, clowns were actually kind of held up a little bit more on a higher level.
Also, you have to, unfortunately, because the 1900s were a real rough century, because that's also when blackface, that's us. Like,
yeah,
blackface is clown work, and like clown work just couldn't make a right step through most of that, you know. And I mean, I guess you could look at stuff like Cirque, and I think though a lot of it is, I think it's just that sometimes things become popular and they overstay their welcome in that form, you know. Like there was a time when kids loved, you know, in the 50s, you know, Bozo the Clown, or 60s, you know, like, and then that just stayed too long. And then, it, you know, everything becomes a parody of itself. Everything becomes twisted when the world changes, but the art doesn't change. Like, you know, music, look at music. Music so like fluidly changes as we change. And like clown is the same. Like we have the same obligation